We begin with more fallout at Galesburg Cottage Hospital. Every surgeon at the clinic associated with that hospital, with the exception of one, has now been terminated. Those employees all notified by email.
And it comes just days after the clinic announced it was filing for bankruptcy, after the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services announced it was pulling funding for the hospital. A report from CMS, that's the federal agency, alleges Cottage is so understaffed the situation inside was posing risk of injury or death to patients and employees. And News 8 Shelby Kluber joins us with an exclusive look inside the hospital, speaking with nurses who are impacted firsthand by these events. Shelby?
Well, it was an emotional morning. With the termination of these surgeons, many staff members today told me it felt like the final nail in what's been a long, painful coffin. On Friday morning, long before the rest of the community was awake, these surgical nurses walked into Galesburg Cottage Hospital. For a few, it would be for the very last time.
And you know the funny thing is, I didn't cry at all.
The tears began flowing as the nurses clocked into work, with some saying they couldn't believe what was happening. Instead of the hustle and noise of a surgical unit, Friday morning's gathering was somber, set among empty hallways and unused equipment. Roughly 12 hours before these ladies arrived at work, their surgeon had been abruptly fired, along with almost every other surgeon associated with Cottage. It's the latest in what's been months of unexplained layoffs at the hospital. From March to November of 2021, government investigators found 128 employees had been terminated. One surgical nurse, whose identity we're protecting, told News 8 they threw us away. This team was supposed to have 5 surgeries on Friday morning. But without a surgeon, none of those procedures would happen. Instead, the scheduling board sat blank and surgical beds remained empty. As the nurses gathered in the hallway, they couldn't stop crying and hugging one another, asking where each person had been able to find new employment. Many carried bags for all the personal items from their lockers and desks. At one point, the surgical carts were wheeled by one last time, the nurses telling us they would never again be used for surgery at Cottage Hospital. Downstairs, the HR department was closed, and the hospital's owners, Sanjay and Priyam Sharma, unreachable. One employee blasting the Sharmas, saying their lack of respect for people's lives, people's jobs, and our community. This is a huge, horrible thing for Galesburg. The Sharmas, who also run a hospital in Michigan, took over at Cottage in the summer of 2020. Since then, reports from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services show a chaotic, disorganized hospital. In June of 2021, one patient needed CPR, but there weren't enough nurses on staff to help. That patient eventually dying. They had cut so many people's jobs, and then they didn't think about who was going to do that person's job, said one employee. That same person telling News 8 she lost 50 pounds last year, saying, "What happened to my hospital, to my Cottage family? I was literally throwing up because I couldn't stomach what I was watching." On Friday morning, one window at Cottage had been written on by an employee, reading, "Liars, shame on the Sharmas." But for all of the tears and anxiety present at Cottage, one freshly terminated surgeon told News 8 the staff could not be robbed of their dignity. He said other doors would eventually open for his staff, because they're good and because they care. As nurse after nurse remarked, "We are Cottage strong." And I have to tell you, I was inside Cottage for about 2 hours this morning. There were no patients in those halls, but there were plenty of staff. Person after person after person, almost everyone I walked by was all crying. And when I would ask how Cottage was going to stay open, many told me they just don't think it will. And I should also point out, the nurse that brought me into the facility today was fired for that action about an hour after I left. Jim?
Well, and let's be honest, this has happened very quickly over the past few weeks.
Absolutely. It comes as a shock to so many of these employees.
All right, Shelby, thank you for the latest. And the next big concern for many of these employees is payment, with some saying their direct deposit that should have appeared last night has yet to be found. News 8 reached out to the Sharmas through their lawyer, but we have not yet heard back. Galesburg Cottage Hospital does have a big economic impact on the city through its property taxes. According to Knox County records, the hospital was billed for about $285,000 in property taxes for tax year 2020. More than $141,000, about half of the hospital's property taxes, is collected by the Galesburg Community School District. Only about $44,000 is collected by city government.